From the mid-1940s to the early 1970s, Oconomowoc resident Don Stewart built his model railroad empire. This image shows which portion of the current layout was Don's original layout. Not much information is known about Don and his layout other than he was a Chicago North Western fan and freelanced an area that included Butler, Wisconsin. He had several industries named after family members, and one station named after the family namesake, Stewart, which still exists on the layout today. Don Stewart passed in September of 1971, and his layout sat almost completely idle in his basement for 20 years. In the 70s and 80s, Mrs. Stewart's papers were delivered by Robert Miller. One day, Mrs. Stewart showed Robert the article Don had published in Model Railroader, and then Robert asked to see the layout. In the early 90s, the Army National Guard built a new facility here in Oconomowoc, and the old facility was given to the city, which then became home of the museum. Originally, the museum had been housed above the old library. More space meant more room for exhibits, and in some way or another, Mrs. Stewart ended up donating Don's layout to the museum. In 1991, Robert Miller and Bob Williams cut the layout into 10 pieces and moved them to the museum. Once they were all at the museum, Robert carefully reassembled them. By opening day, May 16, 1992, Robert had one train running. Unfortunately, we do not have any photographic history of the layout's move or reassembly. Harry Evans, who laid the golden spike just a short time ago, took home buildings and rolling stock for cleanup and repair. In October of 1993, the WISE Division of the NMRA came to the museum for a layout tour and awarded the museum with a certificate of appreciation. The museum board of directors were happy they had a train up and running on the exhibit, but asked that more Oconomowoc content be added to make the exhibit more relevant, aside from it just being built by a former Oconomowoc resident. This image shows the area covered by the first expansion of the layout. The stub-ended yard, which is now the heart of the industrial area on Oconomowoc, was extended with a loop of track circling the entire layout so that 2 trains could be run simultaneously. Oconomowoc was built into this new loop of track, and the most notable structures would be the Oconomowoc Depot, which still stands today as Maxim's Depot Restaurant, and Draper Hall, which was razed after a fire destroyed most of the building. Harry Evans scratch-built both structures, putting 600-plus hours into each building. These buildings are complete with interiors that include tables, chairs, and window treatments. The first expansion was completed in 2011. That seems like a long time, but there were only 4 volunteers working on the layout at that time. From there, the focus shifted to reliability. Hand-laid brass track was removed and replaced with commercial nickel-silver trackage. At times, they had to use a hammer and chisel to remove the concrete-like substance that held the old hand-laid ties in place. Once the track work was replaced on the lines in use, the railroad had 4 operational trains, 2 mainline loops, and 2 self-reversing shuttles. The railroad was named Milwaukee and North Western by one volunteer, since it was now a combination of the 2 roads. The WISE Division of the NMRA visited again in October of 2012 and again awarded the museum a certificate of appreciation. By April of 2013, the volunteer group had grown to 9 people. Around that time, Harry Evans decided to donate his Chicago Northwestern layout to the museum. Plans were drawn up, and the museum board approved them. That started the second layout expansion. This image shows what was added to the layout by this second expansion. The portage yard on the right of the image was all constructed new on site. The rectangle in the bottom left corner is Hillsboro, which sits above the hidden staging yard in the top left corner of the layout. The first step in the process was to move the layout to accommodate the space needed for the second layout to be added to it. In December of 2013, members of the National Honor Society of Oconomowoc High School came to help move the layout 18 inches further away from the wall. The display cases that were on the wall were put under the layout. A 45-foot-long mural backdrop was added to the walls behind the layout. When I joined the group in June of 2013, the mural was half completed. I immediately stirred the pot by designing a logo combining elements of the Milwaukee Road and Chicago Northwestern logos, and then as a group we refined it. I then started a Facebook page for our railroad. Once the mural was completed, Harry started disassembling his railroad in November of 2014. We also added a third auto-reversing shuttle, a streetcar, to represent the Milwaukee Electric Railway and Light line that once ran through Oconomowoc. The week after Trainfest, we held our first model railroad open house, and despite advertising for only 3 weeks and being only open for 2 hours, we had some 60 visitors. After the open house, we discovered that our railroad shared its name with another Oconomowoc model railroad made popular by MR Video Plus's Rehab My Railroad video series, the Milwaukee North Western Line's Wisconsin Division. So we slightly altered our name to Milwaukee North Western. By the end of 2014, our group had grown to 17 volunteers. By March of 2015, most of the sections of Harry's layout were in place, and most of the track was in place, but it was not yet operational. The Hillsboro section had not yet been added to the layout. We were also able to run 6 trains reliably. One of the biggest problems we had to overcome was how to be able to run our railroad in DCC, but still be able to run in DC for the museum docents so they can run the trains for visitors when we are not here. I'm not going to go into details on the solution, as that will be covered in the next clinic. By September of 2015, all the track work was complete except for the hill up to Hillsboro. At this time, we had contemplated and discussed having a golden spike ceremony during the next open house. For whatever reason, probably because we got busy trying to finish up as much as possible for the open house, the ceremony never occurred. During the second open house, the week after TrainFest 2015, we had 7 trains running around the layout and an operator controlling an 8th train switching cars in the portage yard. We still had some scenery to complete in Watertown and Hillsboro, and general touch-up and revamping on the rest of the layout. In 2016 and 2017, a lot of work was put into scenery, adding lighting to the buildings, and we even started dabbling in operations. Our open houses continued to grow, with 200 to 250 people attending each year. And we also started to refer to ourselves as a club. The operating sequence tests and first operating sessions gave us a list of things to work on, both with the rolling stock and the layout. With some refinement and a lot of rolling stock pulled off the layout, we've run 3 more successful operating sessions. But there was a white elephant on the layout. Aside from a loop of track around the original inner workings of the layout and a shuttle that ran back and forth, the Butler Terminal area was nothing more than a static display. a very large static display. During one of our meetings, one of our members asked if we were going to do anything with that area and suggested rebuilding it so we could use it. This gave us a tremendous opportunity to expand the layout operationally. This was the start of the third expansion. This image shows the area of the original layout that we're in the process of rebuilding. As we started demolition, we discovered there wasn't a lot of structural integrity in the original layout, and that needed to be fixed, so the job grew exponentially right off the bat. Everything in the Butler Terminal area was reframed with new sub-roadbed. This also meant the upper part of the blue line had to be reframed as there wasn't anything holding it up. At this point, the majority of the track is back in, and operationally, we've added 11 new industries to be served. This should be enough capacity to re-add the 70 pieces of rolling stock that were originally moved when we discovered we had too much on the layout for operations to work decently. As you can see, we have plenty of scenery to work on to keep us busy for quite a while yet. When we're done with that, who knows what's next? As we all know, a model railroad is never finished.